Hi, everyone, and welcome to Estimating 102, Advance Your OnCost Estimating Skills. This is a continuation of our two-part estimating series. Part 1, Estimating 101, is available on demand on our YouTube channel. This session is designed to build on that foundation. In Part 1, we covered the mechanics of building an estimate. Today, we're getting into the tools that make estimating work harder for your team, your reporting, and your bottom line. This is where you will start to feel how the platform can be tailored to the way you work. I'm Ivy Cole, a technical writer here at UDA Technologies, and back with me today is Carly Orlando, a senior success coordinator on our customer success team. Carly, part 1 was a great foundation, and I'm glad today we're going to build on that. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, of course. I can't wait to dive in.
Before we do that, here's what we're covering today. We'll start with advanced estimating settings, including things like item defaults, calculation methods, and more, before moving into adjustments and how they differ from change orders, organizing your estimate with room, phase, and building organizations, and assigning resources at the line item level. From there, we'll get into costbook assemblies and close out with the financial reporting tools and show you exactly how a job is tracking in real time, including job costing reports and how the estimate connects to client selections and change orders. By the end of today's session, you'll have a deeper understanding of how the tools that make the estimate more accurate, more organized, and more connected can work for you and the rest of your project. All right, Carly, now let's get into it.
Yeah, sure thing, Ivy. And I'm so excited for today. Last webinar, kind of like you said, we discussed the basics of building an estimate and deciding on its structure. And so I really want to start estimating 102 today by taking a look at some of the estimate settings that are going to be available to you. When we step back and take a look at estimating as a whole, there are a few decisions that can be made that help shape how efficiently the entire estimate gets built. So if you navigate to the estimate settings on your ribbon, you have several options here. I want to start first with item defaults. It's a feature that's easy to overlook, but it pays off consistently on estimates with lots of line items. Item defaults allow you to preset values that will automatically populate when you add a new line item to the estimate. You can set defaults for 5 fields. You have unit, classification, status, markup type, and tax type. If the majority of your items share the same unit of measure, the same classification, or the same tax type, you can set that up here, and every new item that you add actually starts with those values in place. Existing line items are unaffected when you change them, so there's no risk of overwriting work you've already done. A great option here is if you're adding all of your materials into your estimate first and you want to go ahead and have those materials set up in their classification and their markup type, you can go ahead and do that. And then when it's time to go back and add labor, you can actually update your default settings, and it just really speeds up the process so you're spending less time filling out individual fields. Once you're done, you just hit save, and that's going to go ahead and update those estimate settings and those item defaults.
Okay, great. And what else in that settings panel affects how the estimate gets built?
Yeah, Ivy. So within this estimate settings ribbon, we have several different options. Another one that's really valuable and I think good to bring up is going to be the calculation methods tab. This controls something different from how individual line item costs are calculated. So if you remember in the first Estimating 101 webinar, we talked about the calculation method in terms of standard calculation versus other forms of calculation. This is a different thing. So when we're looking at this section, this is how we're going to define how the estimate is going to calculate remaining value and balance. So there's two different columns where job costing values may be populated. You have a column in your estimate called the actuals column. You also have one called the QuickBooks actuals column. You'll also notice that you will have one called invoiced and one called QuickBooks invoiced. So kind of to break those out and make that a little easier to understand and digest, the actuals column in ConstructionOnline's estimating is going to include the total value of all payments made against purchase orders and bills within the purchasing feature in ConstructionOnline. So actuals is referring to actuals that are actually listed in ConstructionOnline, whereas QuickBooks actuals is actually a different value. If you are connected to QuickBooks Online or QuickBooks Desktop and you are importing values back into ConstructionOnline, you have the choice to import the total value of bills and expenses in QuickBooks into its own column called QuickBooks Actuals. So those are two separate things. Actuals is coming from purchasing, QuickBooks Actuals is coming from QuickBooks. It's the same concept or same principle with the invoiced. So you have an invoiced column, which is going to include the total value of invoices in Construction Online, as well as a QuickBooks invoiced column. The QuickBooks invoiced column is going to include the total value of invoices in QuickBooks. So when we're looking at these two fields, they're different. They may provide different information based on what you have in Construction Online compared to QuickBooks. So what we're really deciding here is we're deciding how we want those values to calculate in for the remaining value and balance. So for remaining value, that is how much you have left to spend on an individual line item. What is your remaining budget that you are willing to have in terms of outgoing costs? For remaining value, you can choose between adjusted cost minus the actuals. So that's the adjusted cost minus whatever values of payments are available in the purchasing feature. You have remaining is the adjusted cost minus QuickBooks actuals. So whatever your adjusted cost in your estimate is, minus the total value of all bills and expenses in QuickBooks, or you can do a combination and actually add what is in the payment section of your purchasing module and what is coming in from QuickBooks and do your remaining value calculation that way. For that remaining value, again, that is primarily for outgoing costs. So how much left do I need to spend on this, or how much left have I allocated in terms of estimating for this line item before I am going over budget in my spending? It's the same general concept for balance value, except this is going to be for incoming. So you have the ability, if you're doing primarily your invoicing and Construction Online, of course, it's going to take that total price. Total price is different from adjusted cost. Adjusted cost is going to be the totals that you're expecting to spend. Total price is the totals of what you're expecting to charge your client. So balance is going to be calculated by taking that total price minus what's currently available in your Construction Online invoicing. If you choose total price minus invoiced, you're going to have the option to do total price minus QuickBooks invoiced, which is the total amount of invoices in QuickBooks. Or again, just like with the remaining budget, some combination of both QuickBooks invoiced plus your normal invoiced amounts in Construction Online. And that balance that's being remained to be paid by the client to you for incoming revenue is going to be total price minus whichever option you pick. This is going to be really valuable when you're doing your job costing. And if you're managing everything inside Construction Online, the default selection of actuals and invoiced will manage really well. If you're syncing with QuickBooks, you're going to want to work with your accounting team based on the way they work and how they have their QuickBooks set up so that your remaining and balance figures are pulling from the right sources.
Carly, it's important to emphasize it's worth setting these correctly up front because these are the same calculation options that surface later in your job costing reports. So having them aligned with your accounting is the way your accounting is set up means your reporting is accurate from the start. And then there's locking the estimate, which is a different kind of protection altogether. Can we go over that?
Yeah, Ivy, and I'm glad you bring that up because within estimate settings is the lock estimate tab. Locking gives you a little bit more granular control over which fields in the estimate can be edited. You can either choose to lock individual fields selectively or use the lock everything option to prevent any changes being made to the estimate at all. Locked fields simply can't be edited until they're unlocked, so there's no risk of accidental overwrite. And thinking about what we just discussed with QuickBooks, if your team is integrating with QuickBooks, locking names is well worth making a habit. Because when Construction Online is sending estimate data to QuickBooks, either QuickBooks Online or QuickBooks Desktop, this applies to both, QuickBooks is what we consider character sensitive. Names have to exactly match not only in the number of characters and the spelling, but also in the case of those characters. Additional capitalizations or minuses. If you have a hyphen in one name, line item name, and then it doesn't in another estimate, what will actually end up happening is that QuickBooks will see it as a brand new item rather than using the pre-existing item in QuickBooks. Over time, that builds up as duplicate entries in your items list that can build real accounting headaches. So locking prevents that from happening accidentally. Now, another point to make, Ivy, and one thing that I want to bring up, I'm a success coordinator here at Construction Online. If you've watched any of the past webinars, you'll hear that I have mentioned this before. As a success coordinator, one of my goals is to make sure that people are able to really effectively implement Construction Online. And one thing that I see is that sometimes people, especially new people who are getting into Construction Online, or if they've never really used the estimating side of it, maybe they primarily use Construction Online for different features, but they're not using it for financials yet. There can be a tendency to want to lock that estimate up front until the entire team is comfortable with the financial portion in order to prevent anyone from accidentally deleting a cost or clicking and accidentally like maybe typing in the wrong thing or having a typo. It's just one of those ways that you can really protect the integrity of your estimate, especially since you're sending a proposal out to your client. You don't want to accidentally send one that has been accidentally updated to have the wrong quantity. Or even after, if you have someone go in and try to make adjustments on the estimate, maybe they're working in the wrong one, or maybe they just aren't aware that that proposal has already been sent. That gives you a lot of work to have to go back and cross-reference and change those values back. So it's just a really good way of ensuring that there's no changes that are being made that can't be edited unless they're unlocked. So you're not having accidental overwrites or changes in data. It's just one of those really good ways that you can protect yourself and cover yourself from making any mistakes.
Yeah, I appreciate you talking about your success clients as well. So before we move on, this ribbon also allows you to go in and set additional tax and markup settings for your estimate, including where you'll establish the classification markups we mentioned in the last webinar, or updating your tax settings that you've originally set when creating your estimate. But enough about the toolbar ribbon. Let's move on to making your estimate feel less overwhelming once created by showing or hiding empty sections. Right, Carly?
Yeah, Ivy, so this feature actually doesn't live in the estimate settings section, but it's above the estimate toolbar. And I'm really glad you bring this up because I think it can be really valuable for people when they're thinking about how to best utilize their templates for Construction Online. So when we're thinking about empty sections, those are going to be defined as any estimate row with no dollar amount associated. That can include categories, subcategories that haven't had line items added yet. Maybe you just aren't planning on using them, or you have line items that have no dollar value included beside them. So using a real world application here, Ivy, what I usually see is my clients will have one large master estimating template. This one large master estimating template will include everything that they are expecting to need in any job across the board. So, for example, if they do any sort of work where they are sometimes installing pools or they're sometimes doing special construction like elevator installs, it's not necessarily for every job, but on enough of them that they want to keep that naming consistent, especially if they're integrating with QuickBooks. They want to make sure that that is standardized. You actually have the ability to just keep including those items in your template. Copy them over, and then, as long as you're not filling in any data, when it comes time to run your proposals or look at that estimate later, you can hide those empty sections. Essentially, what that is going to do is all of those line items are then going to be removed from your view so that you can still include those sections in your template, keeping them consistent, but then they're not going to be visible to you. They're going to disappear from your view. It can just make the estimate less overwhelming, especially if some jobs are going to have things like special construction. You want to keep consistent, but you don't want it on every estimate or have to kind of filter through what's been zeroed out to date.
Yeah, definitely. So now that we've covered some of the tools that can help you improve your efficiency when creating your estimates, let's go ahead and jump to some of the information you can include in your estimate while adding items and pricing, beginning with adjustments.
Yeah, Ivy, and this is a really important point that I want to make because there is a distinction that needs to come with this. Adjustments compared to a change order. So both allow you to modify an estimate's costs, but in Construction Online, they are going to serve very different purposes and create very different paper trails. So thinking about the difference between an adjustment and a change order. A change order is a formal documented scope change. It is going to be something that involves the client. It's going to modify the contract value. It's going to require client review and approval, and it's going to create a formal legal record that's referenced throughout invoicing and reporting. That is the right tool when the scope of work is actually changing, as it serves as an amendment or an addendum to the contract itself that you're running. So if you generate a proposal and something comes up later, maybe they did not have a pool and now they want to add one. The business did not have elevator system and now they need one. Maybe there were certain things that needed to change because of a code update or something that is going to change the scope of the job. that is going to be a change order. It needs an amendment to the original contract with the agreed upon scope. With that being said, not every change in price or cost is associated with a scope change. And that's where adjustments come in. So, an adjustment in Construction Online is an internal correction, sometimes called a variance, used in situations where maybe you made a pricing error, you realized that a quantity was off, you need to rework a number without generating a client facing documentation. If you're using the adjustments column in Construction Online, that is not going to affect the original contract value. They're tracked separately and they don't go through a client approval workflow. This is usually referring to something that is going to be a cost burden or impact that is the builder's responsibility rather than something the client would accept any responsibility for. So when we're looking at these adjustments, you can just go into your section on your estimate and then just type in that adjusted cost, and that's going to allow you to get your updated amounts. The practical difference. So let's think about a real world application for this. Say your lumber costs come in higher than expected because your original estimate was based on a quote that expired. That's probably something that's going to be an adjustment. The agreed upon price with the client was that this was going to cost this amount of money, especially if you're working on a fixed fee contract. Something has happened and you need to go back and update that later. You would be able to go in and do a correction to your own numbers while not changing what the client has approved. In that same vein, let's say we are working with the opposite. In the fixed fee contract example, let's say we get a special discount on lumber and we actually get 20% off our lumber purchase, maybe for loyalty, maybe we happen to hit a really good deal. Because it's fixed fee, the client still had agreed to pay X amount of money. So you can put in a negative value into the adjustments to say, I actually expected to spend more on this. And then that's going to contribute to the profit that you're making on that individual line item. So, really great ways for managing all of those types of things. Just remember that a change order, really great if you have an adjustment to the contract. If it's anything that you're going to need client approval on, that's great. If something happens, let's say somebody accidentally breaks a countertop and you're going to be held responsible for that, you can go ahead, add that in as an adjustment, and that's going to update the adjusted cost field in your Construction Online estimate.
And the distinction matters both for your own records and for what your reporting shows later. Your financial reports will reflect change orders and the contract value. Adjustments show up as an internal variance. Keeping those clean means your reporting stays accurate throughout the project. And related to that, there's also how waste factors into quantities.
Yeah, Ivy, and I'm glad you bring that up. So when we're thinking about adding things to line items, if we're going in, we have the ability to add waste percentages into Construction Online. So when you're estimating materials, the quantity you actually need to order is often a little bit different than the quantity that's actually going to be installed. There's usually, using an example of tile, there's going to be cutting or little fabrics or scraps that you're going to have, and that's not necessarily going to contribute, or you're going to have weird cutouts. You may need more tile than what the actual square footage of the room is. In other terms, there's going to be overage to account for when you're looking at these materials. Basically, by adding a waste percentage in, you can go in and add like a certain amount. So if I wanted to add in a 5% waste, it is going to take whatever my unit value is and it is, or my original quantity is, and it's actually going to give me an adjusted quantity based on that cost so that I can see what that update to that my pricing is going to be. It keeps your material quantities realistic without having to manually inflate every item. The estimate is going to do that math based on the waste factor that you're defining.
Yeah, so getting those quantities right is one layer of accuracy. The other is knowing across 100 line items what belongs where. And that's where room, phase, and building organizations come in. Right, Carly?
Yeah, absolutely. And a couple things here just that I want to note. When we're looking at the columns, you do have the ability to show hide columns and organize them in a way that makes sense for you. As you can see here, I have organized mine where I have my unit cost, my quantity, my unit, base cost, waste, adjusted. You can go in and customize this at any time. So if you're not seeing something like the room or phase report or room or phase fields, you can absolutely go in and adjust those at any time by right-clicking on the column headers and hitting Show Hide Columns. We mentioned this last session as well, but I want to bring it up because I think it's a really valuable tool. that in the view section, you actually have 5 column settings where you can go in and customize what columns are going to show for each of those views. So in thinking about room, phase, and building, you may want to include that on like your advanced estimate view so that you have access to it. But maybe on your job costing view, you don't care so much about that. So just an important little point to note, if you're scrolling through your estimate in real time while watching this webinar and you're not seeing those columns, it is worth just checking to make sure that they are showing. Now, what are room, phase, and building? So when we're looking at them, they are going to be organizational components that you can assign at the line item level within the estimate. They're not changing the estimate structure. Your categories are remaining the same. Your subcategories are remaining the same. Your line items are staying exactly where they are, but they are going to add a layer of organization so you can filter, review, or report based on those values. So within each field, you're going to notice a little gear icon. You're going to be able to click on that gear to control which options are appearing in the drop down for that field. So if we're going into our room and we have bedroom, living room, kitchen, master, maybe I want to add something for a finished basement. Maybe I want to add something if I do more commercial work that's going to relate back to that commercial work. This is going to be customizable to you and your team. And I would highly recommend going through and making sure that these match with the real work that you are doing. You can have as many of these as you want. You can put them in whatever order you'd like, but it does give you that customization ability. So once you go through and you customize those out, you can actually select on there, hey, I know that this is going to be related to this room in my estimate. Or going on, we talked about phase. Maybe you do phase building. You don't do it by room. You have phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 construction. You can actually go through and customize that. Of course, same concept, click on the gear, and then you can go through and assign them out to phase. If you do multi-family work or larger scale commercial work, you can actually do the same thing with building and associate it with different building numbers. So really and truly, it's going to be very valuable where same scopes repeat across separate structures to be able to break those down. You can assign them as you build the estimate, or of course, you can go back and add them after the fact. The same item can carry all three simultaneously. So you may have a line item that's detailed as building A, foundation phase, and a specific room if your project requires that level of detail.
And these don't just help during the build. When you've assigned room, phase, and building consistently across your estimate, you can generate reports that break costs down by those dimensions. That's the kind of reporting that's useful at a client meeting, a budget review, or when you're trying to figure out where a job started to run over. There's other customizable categorizations you can add to line items as well, such as stage, trade, type, group, floor, giving you several options for ensuring you know what is happening where. And building off that same principle, descriptions, specifications, and notes follow the same logic. The estimate captures information that your team, subs, and potentially your client will need later. The more complete that record is when you build it, the less anyone has to reconstruct it mid-project. And those assignments pay off directly in reporting. Carly, can you tell us about the room and phase summary reports?
Yeah, absolutely, Ivy. So if you are working in Construction Online and you go to the financial report section for the job, you have the ability to run room summary and phase summary reports. So scrolling down to your estimate reports, when you are looking at those room phase summary reports, you are going to have the ability to basically filter estimate data by the room or phase assignments you made during the building of the estimate. Both follow the same structure. You basically select the estimate that you want to work in. You're going to choose whether you want to run the report for all rooms or phases. You can filter by resource, and you can choose like what display columns you want to include. So you have the option to show description, resource, base cost, total price. You have additional options like group, trade, stage, type available depending on how your estimate is organized. You can also choose to include a room or phase breakdown and signature line in your actual room summary report. And an important thing to note here is that if you're running your proposal, you actually have the ability to include room and phase breakdowns in your proposal as well. So if you don't want to just run a summary report, but you want to include that on your actual proposal that you're giving your client, you have that ability. So these are not only just useful internally for your own purposes, But client facing, you're able to provide a level of documentation that can put you above other builders in the same market because you're able to provide that categorized filtered view that the client is looking for. So for a residential project, the room summary report can break down the budget by space. You can handle a client a cost summary for their kitchen or primary suite without manually pulling those numbers. For a commercial project, the phase summary report can show by stages of construction, which maps directly to how a draw schedule or pay application might be structured. So the quality of these reports is only as good as the consistency of assignments. The more you do that, maybe even by utilizing the item defaults that we talked about, it becomes an automatic byproduct of good estimate organization rather than some big cleanup task you have to do at the end of your estimate.
And the estimate doesn't just track costs, it can also track who's responsible for them. How does resource assignment work within the estimate, Carly?
Yeah, Ivy, and this is a really great segue that you've made because when we think about resources, you can notice here in the room summary report that you can actually filter by resource. So when we are in the estimate itself, we have the option to go in and assign resources to line items. Again, if you do not see that category, it's super simple. Just show hide to column. You would just scroll to find resource and you would just add it on there. And then you are able to pretty much go in and assign whoever you want to that job. So if you wanted to assign like a specific employee or a subcontractor directly to an individual line item, you can. You can assign one or more resources. If you have multiple people working on the same thing or you're getting materials for something from multiple people, you can include that. This creates a direct link between the estimated scope and the person responsible for it. The value there is pretty straightforward. Like you saw, you can filter your reports by resource and you know exactly who or what is tied to the scope. That accountability also lives elsewhere. So if you're looking in your estimate sidebar, if you scroll down under the estimate summary, you can see the price by category. You can see the price by type. You can see costs per classification. What do my materials cost? What is my labor cost? What are my equipment costs? What are my costs by resource? So you're going to be able to see those subcontractors and vendors listed out there. And when you do your taxes by type, taxes by classification, you have all of that at the click of a button, and it can be very, very powerful for you if you're using your estimate to its highest abilities.
Okay, so now let's jump back to reporting, but for resources. The accountability doesn't just live in the estimate, it's also in that reporting. So let's look at the materials list report.
Right. So when we're thinking about assigning resources and we're thinking about the types of values and reports that you can run from that, if you go back to that financial reporting section, we have a materials report. You can go in, you can select the materials report, and then you're actually able to create a materials list for the following contact. If you are working with different vendors or different suppliers, and you know that you're getting your lumber from various places, you can see exactly what materials you need based on that vendor so you can make your purchase orders more easily, more effectively. You can provide your client with more updated information about where that material is coming from if they're concerned about sourcing. So it really just gives you a consolidated view of all the material classified items against the estimate. And you are able to actually go in, generate the list not just for scope, but for the entire estimate if needed. The generation wizard, of course, is going to walk you through a few steps. You can specify the vendor or resource contact. You can add notes, and just like with the other reports, choose which columns you want to display. You also have the option to choose whether or not you want to include item descriptions or item images, which can make the list more useful if you're giving it to a team for procurement. So this report goes to suppliers for quoting, to the field team for procurement, or to whoever is responsible for ordering materials on your jobs. It's built directly from that estimate, utilizing those resources with no separate list that you have to go back and create on a different spreadsheet.
And because it's pulling from the estimate, it's always current, Carly. If quantities or pricing have been updated since the last time you ran it, the list reflects that automatically. It's one of those reports that's easy to underestimate until you're on a job where material coordination is moving fast and you need an accurate list in someone's hands quickly. All right, let's go into cost book assemblies, the tool that I think makes the biggest difference for teams ready to move beyond item by item estimating.
Absolutely. And we teased this a lot in the last webinar, so I'm
Mhm.
excited that we're getting a chance to go over it. So in the upper right-hand corner of your Construction Online account, you will see your initials. If you click on those, or if you've added a avatar picture or a profile picture, that will show up in its place. Either way, when you click on that, it's going to open your company drop-down menu. Under the financial settings section, you have your company cost books. As we mentioned, cost books are going to allow you to go in, they're going to allow you to add individual pricing for individual line items. However, assemblies are going to take that concept and essentially expand upon it. So, thinking about what an assembly is, a cost book assembly is a saved group of related items that can be added to an estimate all at once. So, instead of pulling in a bunch of cost book items, we are basically pre-setting up a package of them and pulling in an entire scope bundle. Maybe that's the materials, labor, equipment, all included with something like a bathroom rough-in or something like that, and you're pulling that in with one action. It's actually going to create a subcategory in your estimate. So when you're thinking about something like a standard bathroom rough-in or specific framing configuration you're building repeatedly, building out those assemblies can make it really, really effective because you're able to go in and add the material item, the associated labor, waste percentages, and even coverage rates if applicable. You build it once in the cost book, and from then on, you can add it to any estimate in seconds. So going back to my project that I was working in, if I want to add a cost book assembly, it's pretty easy and effective. I can right click and do insert cost book assembly, and then I just pick my assembly information, and when I hit insert, it's going to put all of those items in. So if I scroll down, going to insert one as an example. When I insert that, you can see all of my cost book items are included. So I'm going to be able to see all of the different things that I'm going to need the waste percentage associated. This is a great example where you can see that waste percentage and how it's going to adjust that quantity so you know what your costs are going to be. And then it's going to give you the unit cost as well as a total. When you hit save on that, it's going to go ahead and plug that directly into my estimate. And I can control how many of those I need. If I need 3 bathroom rough-ins, when I'm importing that assembly, I have the option to choose that. These assemblies are fully compatible with the 3-level standard calculation structure we recommended last time, and that's why that recommendation from part 1 matters. For teams using Redline Takeoff, which is our built-in takeoff feature, cost books and assemblies can be assigned directly to takeoff measurements. So those quantity data flow in a complete multi-scope rather than one single line item.
Yeah, and that upfront investment in building those assemblies in the first place is important. But once they exist, the consistency benefit is significant. Every estimate that uses that assembly is built from the same components, as Carly mentioned. They're priced the same way with the same structure. That makes reviewing estimates, comparing jobs, and identifying where costs are running high much more straightforward. When pricing shifts, like a supplier adjustment or maybe a labor rate change, you update the assembly at once, and the change is reflected going forward. You're not hunting through individual estimates looking for where that item appears. Now that the estimate has been built and we've found different ways to categorize items and streamline the process, let's move on to talking about something we discussed last webinar. The estimate in ConstructionOnline is more than a single document to be built, but it serves as a living reflection of your project's financials. So, let's move on to reporting and integrations that connect everything together within the estimate.
Yeah, Ivy, and I'm glad you bring this up. So one thing I want to mention is we talked a little bit about the different types of columns in ConstructionOnline for job costing. We do have a job costing view, so if you wanted to go in there and customize that, you can include those. When you're looking at them, show hide column, of course you have that committed actuals and invoiced, and we have that QuickBooks actuals, QuickBooks committed, and QuickBooks invoiced that we discussed. So as you're getting your items in there, you may want to run a report that's going to show you some really good job costing or work in progress values. Thinking about what's available to you through the financial report section of ConstructionOnline, you have several job costing reports that are really effective for you. You have your estimate versus actual report. It's going to be your primary costing view in ConstructionOnline, and it's going to show your original estimated cost for each scope alongside the actual costs that have come in through purchase orders, bills, and expenses, so you can see in real time how the job is tracking. When you generate the report, you'll have a few options to configure. You can choose to show or hide subcategories, include approved selection allowances, and control whether items with zero actuals or zero adjusted costs are even included in that report. There's also a remaining value calculation section. So that's the same section that we talked about where you can control how that remaining value is being calculated. So setting that correctly here ensures the report reflects the right information. Once it's generated, you'll see the estimate amount, the actual amount to date, any variance, and the percentage over or under budget at each level of your estimate structure. This is a report that answers the question, is the job going to finish where we planned? Are we going to be on the red? And by running this report, even if you are on the red, it gives you a chance to course correct moving forward. Because one thing that I've heard consistently, Ivy, is I don't know if I'm in the red on a job until it's tax time and I'm actually having to do a full audit. This gives you the power to kind of take accountability for that and improve that actively if you're going over budget.
Because if you're only looking at the actuals, you can get a false sense of where you are on the job. That variance column is what tells the real story. And having it broken down at every level of the estimate structure means you can see exactly where a job is drifting before it even becomes a problem. And then there's the billing side of the picture, estimate voice versus invoice. Can you show us that report?
Yeah, so where estimate versus actuals tracks how your costs are performing, the estimate versus invoiced is really the one that everyone should be most concerned with because it's shifting that perspective to billing. So it's showing how much of the estimated scope has been invoiced to the client and how much you have left to remain to collect on the job. So when you're generating the estimate versus invoice report, it's going to look pretty similar to that estimate versus actual settings. You're going to be able to control approved selections, change orders, company overhead and margin. Same concept with whether or not you want to define if you want to include those zero categories or empty categories. And you're going to be able to calculate that balance. So the result is a clear picture of where you are in the billing cycle or invoicing cycle relative to the estimate. How much have you actually invoiced your clients? How much is still outstanding for you to collect on? And how much your invoicing is keeping pace with the work that you're completing, especially if you do any sort of progress billing.
Okay, so this is the report that keeps cash flow visible. You're not cross-referencing invoices against a separate document. Everything ties back to the estimate structure you've already built within ConstructionOnline. And then there's committed versus actual, which looks at cost performance from a different angle.
Yeah, Ivy. So if we're thinking about committed versus actuals, if actuals are going to be amounts that are outgoing from our account, invoiced is what's coming in, committed is hypothetical outgoing. So it's what we're committing to spend through purchase orders is typically the easiest way to think about. So what you're committing to pay, essentially. So this is useful for tracking how purchase orders are being fulfilled. How much of a committed scope has been billed, how much is still outstanding. With this report, when you're generating it, you have a few options worth knowing about. You can display adjusted cost instead of base cost. That's going to account for any of those adjustments that we talked about or linked change orders in the subcategory totals. You can also show the resource column, which surfaces who is assigned to each scope. That can be really useful if you're tracking subcontractor performance. Perhaps a subcontractor is consistently underbilling or overbilling you. It may bring up a question of, okay, why is that occurring and how can we hold our subcontractors more responsible? Or potentially, maybe I need to find a new subcontractor, even if I have a good relationship with this one, because we consistently go over budget of what they are telling us that we should be committing to spend. So you get a lot of really, really good insight into subcontractor performance. And if you're syncing with QuickBooks, there's an option to pull those committed costs and actuals directly from there rather than whatever's in ConstructionOnline. So that filter by resource field, you can pull in a report scope to a specific subcontractor. And if you're managing a high volume of vendor relationships, that report keeps committed costs, actual spending, and outstanding balances visible all in one place for you.
Okay, Carly. So committed versus actuals tells you how your purchase orders are tracking. The over budget report takes that a step further. Instead of you having to find the problem, it finds you. Can we move on to that one?
Yeah, so comparing this to the estimate versus actual report, Ivy, when we're thinking about the estimate versus actuals, that's actually going to track project profitability by showing the variance between total estimated cost and the actuals. However, that's going to be for everything. So if you've gone under budget, it is giving you an overall picture. The over budget report is going to really narrow that scope of the report down to only show you the sections of your estimate where actual costs exceed the estimated costs. This can be really valuable, especially if you need to do any sort of like internal audit to see where you have gone over on a job. That's something that I see a lot of my clients do. They do an audit to see where they went over, where they went under, and kind of control how can we accommodate for this in the future. So again, when you're generating that over budget report, you have your options to configure show categories, subcategories, resource columns. You can choose to use your actuals from QuickBooks if you prefer, and whether or not you want to use that adjusted cost or base cost. But ultimately, it's going to give you that over budget. Where have you gone over on this job? What money did you actually end up overspending on? Because that is money that is coming out of your pocket that needs to be accounted for. So when you're running to a quick read on where a job is in trouble, or when you're doing a mid-project review, rather than scanning the full estimate problems, like you said, Ivy, this one is going to surface those problems directly for you.
Okay, so that's a lot of reporting, and those reports give you the financial picture from multiple angles. But the estimate also connects to two other areas of the platform that are worth understanding: client selections and change orders. As we discussed, the estimate serves as the repository for financial data, so you can see that information within the estimate as well.
Yeah, Ivy, and let's talk about where you can kind of find that information. So, we've talked a lot about the reports that are available from the estimate, but if we step back and we think of the estimate as a living document, this is where everything is going to come back and reconsider. It is your central repository for all of that financial information. When you are looking at it, you're going to have all of your CO costs included. You're going to be able to go in and see your adjusted. We talked about that, pulling it in from QuickBooks, purchasing, invoicing features. All of that's going to be visible directly on the estimate itself. So you're going to be able to really in real time kind of get updated information based on that. Additionally, you have the option to see your client selections. So thinking about allowances, we talked about that a little bit last time. Client selections are going to be where those allowances and client-facing choices live in ConstructionOnline. Within the estimate, you can view the selections that have been built for the project, and you're going to be able to actually see the net approved amount and how that impacts the estimate as a whole. Those are going to be pulled out and they're in their own separate section. If you scroll to the bottom of your estimate, there is a purple bar called the selections totals. You can also navigate to it by clicking on the bottom section right here, but it's going to show you the selection categories, the selections themselves, and the selection choices. As approvals are getting made, it's going to show you whether or not that choice has been approved and what the net difference is on those. So it's going to give you some really good information on staying current as client decisions are made, what that's going to look like in terms of the overall contract price, as well as the contract cost, and you're going to be able to do all of that without manually updating it on your end.
And when we talk about integration, that's the kind of integration that prevents a common problem of allowances that live in one place while the estimate lives somewhere else, with no automatic connection between them. When the client makes a decision, the estimate already knows about it. And the same principle applies to change orders. How does that connection work, Carly?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm glad you asked. So change orders in ConstructionOnline are kind of built as a almost like a mini estimate. You can choose to either have a lump sum change order or a detailed change order. No matter which way you choose to do it, you can actually choose to either leave that unlinked if it does not affect anything currently in the estimate. Say it's a fully new scope. It's going to be they want a pool. That is an amendment to the contract, of course, but it's not necessarily something that's linked to the estimate because there was no pool item in the estimate. However, with that being said, if you do have something that changes what is currently in the estimate, so for example, let's say you're running your client says they want a garden tub instead, they do not want a walk-in shower anymore, you can actually go in and choose to link that specific change order back to a subcategory so you can see it when you're looking at that. So it's going to reference the estimate structure you've already built rather than just starting from scratch. Those types of connections and being able to see the change orders and how they are affecting your job, where they are affecting the job, and whether or not those are linked to anything that currently exists in that estimate structure is going to be really, really valuable in terms of your job costing reportings and being able to get insight into how your job is going rather than just looking at the original bid and not really having a good connectivity. That change order cost column that we talked about, that is going to show the value if it's been linked to that subcategory. And there's a section, just like with selections at the bottom, where you're going to be able to see those approved change orders, the total change order cost, the markup, and what the change order price is going to be. So what the client is actually being charged. So really great valuable insights from pretty much every financial tool in Construction Online. Client selections, change orders, purchasing, invoicing, bid tracking. When you're building out your bids, you're actually able to generate purchase orders for those or use the estimate items on those bid sheets. And the payment applications are going to pull in both your invoices and your change orders to make sure that you're able to really effectively bill based on that job. So all of this is very, very interconnected. Rather than balancing 50 million spreadsheets that you're having to reference or cross-reference, it gives you a central platform to control all of that together.
Okay, well, I'm looking at the time, and that's a lot of capability built directly from one estimate. But I think it's time to wrap up, Carly. Any final thoughts before we do so?
I don't think so. I'm just really glad that everybody had the chance to come view it. If you have any questions, of course, we are going to be sending out the recording, but I'm more than happy. If you've never used an estimating platform or you're currently using Construction Online for its other capabilities other than the financial ones, I think it's worth saying that you get a very high return on investment by beginning to do your financials in Construction Online. And I personally am more than happy to talk to you guys about that, as is any member of our support team, which you can access at any time.
Okay, well, that brings us to the end of part two. We covered a lot of ground today. One more thing before we go. Comments are coming soon to OnCost Estimating. That will allow your team to communicate directly within the estimate, keeping conversations tied to the specific scope or line item they're about. We're excited about that one for sure. Estimating is available with all active Construction Online subscriptions, with some features and reporting tools available based on your subscription tier. If you have any questions like Carly mentioned, feel free to reach out to Construction Online either through the website, constructiononline.com, or to anyone on our support team directly. If you haven't watched it yet, you should watch part one, Estimating 101, Learning the Basics of On-Cost Project Estimating. That recording is available now, and this one will be soon. Thank you all so much again for joining us today. And Carly, thank you for walking us through the demo.
Yeah, absolutely, Ivy. My pleasure. I love talking about estimating. This one was really fun. If you have questions, like I said, don't hesitate to reach out to our support team. Happy estimating, guys, and have a great day.
Bye, guys.